Okay, I think we're live. I have here with me DJ Rausch, um, and I'm Mark Angelotti. We're on the Infinite Regress YouTube channel here. We're here to discuss the issue of the afterlife in heaven, eternal bliss in heaven, and whether or not that's an ethical thing to promise somebody. Um, does it give them false hope, and is false hope by itself something that's unethical to provide to somebody? Now, DJ, you've been saying that even under the kindler, gentler, universalist version of salvation theory, that there is still something unethical. It may not be as scary as threatening someone with hell and offering them heaven if they follow the theology or they follow the path that you lay in front of them. But even under universalism, even under universal salvation, there's still something unethical there because we don't have strong evidence that heaven exists. Is that your view?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, do you want to elaborate as to why maybe providing someone this idea about heaven would be a bad thing?
Well, it's a good thing if heaven really exists. But if I take the probability that heaven is real as being very low, then it would be unethical to convince somebody that the probability is very high. And it's not lying to someone if you yourself believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But that gets into a question of is there something immoral about passing on false information if you believe the information yourself?
Sure. Well, and then that gets to the question of whether or not we should what kind of evidence should we have for an afterlife? Like, if I tell you that Pennsylvania exists, and you see the signs "Welcome to Pennsylvania" as you drive east, from where we live, you would take that as pretty good evidence that there is such a place as Pennsylvania. But I suppose those could be fake signs. There could be a fake governor of Pennsylvania pretending, just going along with the gag that there is this place called Pennsylvania. I suppose one could be hyper skeptical and say that such a place does not exist. But what kind of evidence should we expect if heaven really does exist? And what sort of lack of evidence would we expect if there is no such place? I mean, should we apply the same sort of skeptical tools to a place like heaven as we would to a place like Pennsylvania?
Well, presumably you can go to heaven, but you can't come back from heaven, near-death experiences notwithstanding. So perhaps near-death experiences, along with written testimony of people who have had visions of heaven, or Jesus talking about heaven, or his disciples talking about heaven, that would all be evidence for heaven. I would say the evidence is not very strong. In fact, it's extremely, extremely weak. Nobody comes back from there. What you're promising somebody is something that happens after they die, so it's impossible to verify. There's no test that you can make to see whether it's really there or not. So it's really conveniently hidden in a place that is inaccessible until after you're dead. And how are you going to verify that now while you're still alive?
So does the work of the does what we read in the New Testament, does that provide any evidence of a kind that would be even stronger than, say, just somebody telling you, "Hey, I had a near-death experience"? I mean, do you think that there's additional weight that we should place on what we read in the New Testament?
I don't think people place weight in the New Testament just because it's a book that's there. I think they place weight in it because of other people that they're around that believe it's true. So that could be friends, family members, people at your church, your pastor, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, it would just be another book. You would treat it as a book of mythology. You would treat it as the the Greek gods being on Mount Olympus.
Yeah.
Maybe Mount Olympus exists, but we don't believe that the gods are living up there.
I see. Yeah. So you think that, let me play devil's advocate here. People are going through their lives and they're dealing with a lot of challenges, and occasionally someone will offer them the idea that they can enjoy everlasting life in heaven, and the argument can be that, hey, without that hope of eternal life, that people just won't be motivated to get through this life. So if you take away their hope, then you've in some way diminished for them life on earth. Does that sound like a reasonable argument to you?
I guess what you're saying is that there may be a usefulness in telling people things that aren't true to help them get through life. And I'm saying that it's better to tell people the truth, to level with them, so that they can plan accordingly. It would be better to know, that your existence is going to cease if that's what's most probable, and to live your life with that in mind.
Okay, and then that gets to the question of, how do we know on something like life after death? How do we really know what the probabilities are? Because I could say, I can say that the chances of life after death are, let's say I said 1 in 1,000. Maybe you would say 1 in 10,000 or something different. But someone else could say, no, it's very likely. And the question is, are we just pulling these numbers, these probabilities out of our heads? Are we just using our intuition? Or do we have some scientific basis, some empirical basis to say the probabilities are really pretty low?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult question. Of course, I believe the probability is very, very low, and many Christians would disagree. They'd say it is extremely high. Maybe they have doubts at times,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly something that they're willing to bet on. However, if the probability is, if the evidence is not there for something, I would give an example of, say, you buy somebody a lottery ticket, and maybe the odds are 1 in a million, but you tell them, oh, you're almost certain to win. That's misleading somebody. I would say that's unethical, because they're going to adjust their behavior accordingly. Maybe they'll go buy something with money, expecting it's going to be there, and it turns out it's not.
Yeah. So, So in the case of the lottery ticket, I suppose, now granted, people always say that, gambling is for people who don't understand math. That's what I've been told anyway. But I suppose with a lottery, we can kind of see, we can see the number of tickets sold, and we can see on a historical basis, we can see that there is this much cash payout compared to this much money that was spent on lottery tickets, and know that, well, the house won. The house got more money out of the lottery than they spent on prize money. And then you can calculate your odds of winning the lottery on that basis with that data in front of you. But with something like, heaven, hell, it seems like one can either take the argument that since there is no historical or empirical basis for heaven or hell, that we could put the odds of such places existing as being extremely low. And that gets to the question of whether or not we're entitled to that kind of evidence to reach those conclusions. Apparently, I guess what you're saying is the absence of evidence, really does represent a cause for skepticism, no matter what you've been taught in church. Is that right?
Yes, I would agree with that. Maybe another example where you can't really affix hard probabilities like you would with the lottery. With the lottery, you know how many tickets are sold, and you know the people have actually won. would be an example of you're stranded in the ocean on a life raft, and let's say both of us are stranded on a life raft together, and we're just out in the middle of open ocean, no land in sight, nothing in sight. And I tell you, well, I'm sure that there's a rescue helicopter coming, any minute now. It's going to rescue us. Maybe I firmly believe that, based on no good evidence. Just hoping. But to tell you that as if I know something, as if I have some communication with the helicopter and I know that it's coming, or it would be unethical. So I really could say something like, well, I sure hope that there is a helicopter around there somewhere that's going to see us and pick us up. But to tell you that I know anything more than that would be irresponsible.
Now, there are some who argue that, hey, philosophers have been making the case for the existence of heaven and hell for centuries, millennia. So for us to sit here and say, that there really isn't any evidence for it, doesn't the work of those philosophers count for anything?
Well, that would be an appeal to authority, right? So, do you trust that these philosophers are smart and that they know what they're talking about? Many times they're just trying to justify something that is part of their culture that's been, kind of drilled in their heads. Or you try to reason through something. And when you're working with such limited information, you can come up with all sorts of theories. I mean, what I'm coming up with now are theories. But we have so little information. It's like the helicopter and the life raft example. You could theorize all sorts of things about this helicopter, but you don't know whether there's a helicopter out there coming for you. And so, in the absence of this evidence, there's just a lot of theorizing and philosophizing going on.
And so maybe that explains why there's so many different ideas about what happens to people, upon death. I mean, in other words, there's some people who believe in the annihilationist theory that, people who don't go to heaven just get annihilated. And then there's some who say, no, there's actually eternal conscious torment. And you're saying maybe the reason why there's these multiple ideas about heaven and hell is because we're dealing with a very limited or maybe non-existent information about these places.
I think it might be more complicated than that. It's that throughout history, there's been some concept of an afterlife or maybe reincarnation. It's easier for people to think that their existence will continue. It's very difficult to imagine you ceasing to exist. So it's a lot easier to think of yourself as being transported to some other location when you die. And so I think it stems from just the sheer inability for us to comprehend our non-existence that leads us to all these theories about what happens to us after we die.
Okay. Now, getting back to the New Testament and maybe the Bible generally, I suppose one argument that could be made against the position you're putting forward is that, no, actually, the Bible isn't just, and the New Testament isn't just another book. This is a book, whereas if you just pick up a book randomly at the library, maybe there's some false information there. Maybe it's mostly false. But with the Bible, you can be confident about what you read in the Bible. Much more, even if they don't necessarily subscribe to inerrancy, they would believe that we can be much more confident about what we read in the Bible than just your average book that we pull off the bookshelf. Now, and on that basis, we can be very confident that there is a heaven and that there is a hell. Do you find problems with that sort of reasoning?
Yes, I would categorize the Bible with mythology from all different cultures. It's people, civilizations telling stories about themselves, where they came from, their ancestors, and it often prioritizes that civilization above others. So you've got the Jews thinking of themselves as the chosen people. Undoubtedly, the Romans had similar beliefs about themselves. So you can find things in there in culture's mythology that are real. You can find real places. You can find perhaps real people, but then there are all sorts of legends told about them, all sorts of legendary events that happen. So while there are some facts in there of locations and perhaps persons, there's so much extra stories that's just grown over time as legends, and the truth, maybe there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere, but there's so many layers of legend on top of it. I don't know how you would trust any of it.
So, but couldn't you be accused of hyper skepticism, of applying such a skeptical attitude towards the Bible to where almost nothing can be believed in the sense that and as I mentioned, the example of the state of Pennsylvania existing, I suppose maybe one could take a hyper skeptical view of that and say we can't really trust that. Or maybe a less extreme example would be did Alexander the Great exist, or did Charlemagne exist? Did the Roman Empire exist, and so on. You weren't there. You weren't there to see it yourself, but you read about it in books, and you believe that there's factual information in those books. It's not all fabricated. Sure, maybe some history writer got a few details wrong about events that happened during the Roman Empire, during the Roman Empire's existence, but for the most part, you can trust that information. Why shouldn't we take a similar view towards the Bible?
There are lots of mythical locations. You take, for example, the lost city of Atlantis that nobody has been able to find. Maybe it's possible, sure, that there was a city that sank, and that legends grew up over that. But nobody's been able to find the evidence for this. So all we have is stories. You could take another example, the city of Troy, which was rediscovered, an actual place. But until you have more evidence for it, it's just fine to disbelieve, or fine to just put a 50-50 on it. But to treat something as if it's near certain when it isn't, I think is irresponsible.
Now, I think you told me of the story of the book of Mice and Men, and about how you see kind of a similarity between the characters, the main characters in that book, and in someone telling somebody about salvation, even universalist salvation. And can you describe the similarity, the analogy that you make with that?
Sure. Now, I haven't actually read the book, but I've heard about the ending, and I think this is a pretty powerful illustration. So in the you've got these I don't know, friends or brothers, George and Lenny. Lenny has a mental disability. He winds up killing somebody accidentally, and the villagers are coming for him, with pitchforks and all, and they're going to kill him and perhaps torture him. So he's gonna see an unhappy end, even though he doesn't realize this yet. So his comrade George tells Lenny about the plans that they had made for the future. We're gonna live on a farm and we're gonna raise rabbits because Lenny loves rabbits, and this is going to be this paradise for Lenny. And he's talking about their plans and what they're going to do. George knows full well in this example that that's not how things are going to end. Things are going to be a very, very bitter end for Lenny. So in order to save Lenny from this, he decides that he has to kill Lenny himself. So he has Lenny turn around as he's telling him this story, and Lenny's really peaceful and happy because he's thinking about the farm and the rabbits. George shoots him in the back of the head. So hopefully, put him a very abrupt ending. Hopefully Lenny didn't even know it hit him. So the very last things that Lenny thought about were, this paradise. And I see in that minus the idea that, okay, George killed Lenny. So, Christians maybe aren't killing the people who they say are going to heaven. They're not ending their lives abruptly. And also the Christians believe, presumably, they don't have a whole lot of doubt over the heaven that they're promising. But other than that, I think that there's a parallel there, in that you've got all these people who are thinking that they're going to have this paradise, and then their life abruptly ends, and that's it.
I see. So yeah. So in that case, well, in that particular case, in that book, it sounds like perhaps George did do the right thing. Although those are special circumstances where he had pretty high confidence that Lenny was going to die one way or the other. It was just a question of whether or not it would be a torturous death or a sudden death, and then also whether or not whether or not he would be feeling good when he died or not. And so because George had that kind of control, but it sounds like there's something more going on in your criticism, in that you think that the way people will live their lives might be altered by the false information. In the case of Lenny, maybe he would have made a run for it if he had known the truth and tried to escape those who are going to try to enact retribution against him. But in the case of a lot of people, when they're told about heaven, I suppose the criticism might be that their lives may be altered by this false information. They may place less value on their life here on earth if they believe there's going to be an afterlife in heaven. Is that your concern?
That's part of it, yes. It's probably the easiest way for me to justify it. But my concern just goes beyond that. I value truth. I value, leveling with people and not telling them stories, that are made up. And let's look at how things actually are. That's something that I value. Now, maybe not everyone values that. To give another example, kids are often told about Santa Claus, about the Easter Bunny, and it's a fun thing, to mislead children and then have them do all sorts of cute things. And then later in life, they find out, and maybe it's not so bad that we lied to them back then, because, nobody seems to be psychologically scarred, at least not permanently, by learning that all that they were told about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny is not real. Now, here we've got an example where people are being told something about heaven that they may never come to realize that it's not there, because, of course, you die before you can come to such a realization. How convenient. So is that still unethical? I see it as being ethical to spread truth and unethical to spread false information. So it's even more basic than the consequence of what would happen to people because of that false information.
I see. So in the case of so it's more of the principle of the thing rather than people's behavior being modified in one way or another. I suppose in terms of the contrast between people being told that heaven exists versus the Easter Bunny is that one could argue that society continues the charade, as you would probably call it, of heaven existing. Whereas maybe at a certain age, I don't know if it's 7 or 8 or 9 years old, where we tell, maybe it's younger than that, where we tell children, nah, there is no Easter Bunny, no, there is no Santa Claus, or maybe they figure it out for themselves. But in the case of heaven, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still find a lot of social support for the concept. And if you are inclined to believe it, there is plenty of people that will help you along that belief. Whereas with the Easter Bunny, I don't know very many people. I don't know very many. I don't know if there is a religious group out there that believes the Easter Bunny is real. Perhaps there is available. I just need to Google it, but and find them. But so it sounds like what we have is a situation where if you have enough people perpetuating a false belief, then it kind of falls on, well, people like you to say, hey, wait a second, we don't really have any evidence for this. Why are we telling people this? And it sort of makes the person who's telling the truth to be sort of a killjoy. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, the truth may be, and I know we're both reading this book by Sean Carroll, where he's talking about poetic naturalism and how you can find meaning, despite there not being any afterlife. The truth may be harsh. It may be it may be that there's no way to sugarcoat it. That everybody is facing annihilation. Not only that, but also some of the things that you see talked about in the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, where anything that you create, is eventually destroyed. Any great works, any great empires, castles that you build, everything eventually, nature wipes away, and any memory of your existence will eventually be wiped away. So it's not even, you can't even say, oh, well, at least I'll be remembered after I die. Maybe you'll be, if you're somebody who is an important historical figure, you may be remembered hundreds or even thousands of years afterward. Will you be remembered 1,000,000 years from now? I don't see that. we have no characters from 1,000,000 years ago that we know anything about.
Okay, well, hey, DJ, I appreciate you coming on kind of sort of at short notice to talk to me about this issue. And I think you made a good case. You've convinced me that I shouldn't go around telling people that they'll be in heaven. Although I will say that when someone's passed away and someone says, well, they're in a better place now, I have a hard time speaking up and telling them that they're wrong at that point in time.
Well, it's like political views. If somebody puts forward a political view that you don't agree with, often you just let it go. Don't get into an argument with people about stuff. If people are going to have all sorts of disagreements, so while I privately fume about, people passing along information that I don't believe is reliable, I often just, keep that feeling to myself.
All right. Well, you have a good rest of your day, DJ, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
You bet.